Good afternoon, and welcome to Writers Unplugged. This is a series that will air throughout the year in support of Cleveland Reads. And Writers Unplugged is a chance to hear your favorite writers or even new to you writers in conversation, as if you were eavesdropping on them in a conversation. Cleveland Reads is an initiative to improve literacy levels in our community, and Mayor Bibb has challenged Clevelanders to read 1 million books and/or 10 million minutes reading this year. My name is Jen Jumba. I'm a librarian here at Cleveland Public Library, and one of my favorite things besides reading is talking to writers. It's an opportunity to get to know their craft, what inspires their stories, where they like to write, essentially getting to know them better and seeing them as human beings and not just the name on the spine of a book. So I'm lucky to be in conversation with best-selling author Mary Kubica, and I believe you all are going to enjoy her latest book, Just the Nicest Couple. But before we get started, a couple housekeeping notes. To find out who else is visiting Writers Unplugged, both virtually and in person, visit clevelandreads.com/unplugged. Max Beck's Books on Coventry is our wonderful independent bookstore, has copies of Mary's books just waiting for you. So you can visit them in person or online at maxbacks.com. And then finally, take a moment. Let us know where you're watching us from. If you have questions about the characters, stories, research, I will be sure to pass them along to Mary. So here's a brief introduction. Mary Kubica is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of over 8 suspense novels, including The Good Girl, Pretty Baby, Don't You Cry, Every Last Lie, When the Lights Go Out, The Other Misses, Local Woman Missing, and Just the Nicest Couple. She's a former high school English teacher and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, in history and American literature. She lives outside of Chicago with her husband and 2 children, and usually some foster kittens. She's won many awards, which include being selected as Amazon's Best Books of the Month, have been library read selections, and they've been translated into over 30 languages and have sold over 3 million copies worldwide. And I think this is my favorite description from Kirkus Reviews, has described Mary as a hell of a storyteller. I agree. And the Chicago Tribune calls her a writer of vice-like control. So I was fortunate enough to meet Mary a few years ago when a mutual friend and writer, Hannah Mary McKinnon, who will be visiting next month, introduced us. Casually, Hannah said, "Hey, Jen, do you know Mary?" It was at that point I sucked all the oxygen out of the room and had a real fangirl moment. I had read all of Mary's books, including her first novel, The Good Girl, and I think after reading it, I had whiplash. As someone who reads a lot of suspense and thrillers, I never saw the ending coming. So Mary's books continue to leave me spellbound and breathless, and I compulsively turn the pages. And truth be told, my fangirl for Mary never does go away. So I will do my best to keep it together this afternoon. So if you want to join me in a welcome to Mary Kubica.
Hi, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
You're quite welcome. So I thought we would start with your latest book, which is Just the Nicest Couple. Can you tell us a little bit more about it in your own words? And I have to say, because it's suspense, no spoilers, right?
For sure. It's always hard, right, to describe a suspense book without spoilers, but I will definitely keep this spoiler free. So Just the Nicest Couple is actually about 2 different couples. We have Lily and Christian, and then Nina and Jake. And Lily and Christian are just like your perfect couple, happily married, very much in love. They've just bought the home of their dreams and are expecting their first child. So they're just in a good place. They're optimistic about their future. Nina and Jake, on the other hand, they have a marriage that's really on the rocks. They're constantly fighting. Jake works as a neurosurgeon, so it's just these really long, stressful hours. He's rarely home, and even when he is home, he's like not completely mentally present. He's not always there for Nina. Nina, at the same time, is taking care of her aging mother, who has a number of health issues, one of which is that she's slowly going blind. So Nina's mother requires more and more care, and that brings, some resentment into the marriage. Jake gets angry over the amount of time that Nina spends with her mother. And so there's just a lot of tension there. And then one night Jake doesn't come home from work, and Nina is just sure that, he's stuck at the hospital, or, that he's just blowing off steam. They'd had a big argument the night before. And so maybe he's just gone to stay at a friend's house or something like that, and he'll be back. but then, he doesn't come back the next morning or for the next couple days. And she starts to realize that something has happened to him, that he's not just somewhere blowing off steam. Meanwhile, the other woman, Lily, knows that she was the last one to see Jake before he went missing. And so she confesses to her husband, Christian, what happened. And the two of them decide that they'll do anything to keep the truth from coming out. So it's like a cat and mouse game of one couple that is, desperate to stop the truth from coming out, and another woman who will do anything to find her missing husband.
Yeah. I think the essence of the what you just said is the tension that exists. It's so beautifully done. We have Laura Reeves, who has just read this, and she said it was very good. And Becky Morris is listening from work, so we'll write her a note, a permission to watch Writers Unplugged, right? Learn.
That's right.
So I'm joining conversation with Mary Kubica, best-selling writer. Where did you get your inspiration for this story?
Yeah, so for this one, I was kind of interested in the idea of exploring the disappearance of a man. I feel like we hear so often on the news or in books that we read about missing women and missing wives, and it's never or very rarely the man. And so I wanted to explore that a little bit more thoroughly and see if, ultimately it's the same story, or if there are some different things that kind of come about when we have this wife looking for her husband who may or may not be in trouble. And I did, and I did kind of uncover some things, as I started to explore. The police don't necessarily take Nina seriously, and they think that maybe her husband has just left her, and so they're slow to believe that he might actually be in danger. And so they make Nina even question herself, and so I think that there are some things that sort of happen in the book that, I don't know if it's always the same when people go missing.
Yeah, it does bring up that question as to how quickly they respond if it's a woman missing versus a man missing. Yeah, very interesting. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to, write about couples? Because it's almost like there's like obviously there's two couples, but like two sets of storylines that are kind of intersecting because Nina and Lily work together.
Yeah. So there's these family, or these couples, I should say, they come together in different ways. They obviously have their separate marriages, but then the two women are coworkers and friends. And the four of them, the two couples, have gone out together. So they're definitely, on friendly terms, and so they know each other. But when in the story, we hear from Christian, the one husband, and then Nina, the other wife, and all of my books so far, they're told from multiple points of view. And so when I started this book, it's kind of one of the questions that I always ask myself when I start a book is, who is going to tell this story? And I love having multiple narrators, because I think that I can just present the story to the reader in a different way. You get that different insight from sort of different, vantage points, and not everybody may come across as truthful. So it makes you as a reader, you have to decide who you can trust, and if you can trust all of them, or if somebody's maybe not telling you the truth. And so I decided on Christian and Nina just because they seemed kind of like the least biased, sort of, they could kind of, they weren't there. They don't know, themselves what happened. So they could kind of investigate what happened for themselves and present that to the reader. And I liked that it was one spouse from each of the marriages, because again, they're presenting a different picture of what happens. And so this is something that when I write this way, I've always written this way. I started with The Good Girl, and it was sort of out of necessity. And it's one of those things that has stuck. But instead of writing a book in the way that you read it, just, page 1 through the ends, I take one of those narrators at a time, and I will write his or her whole story, or as much of it as I can, and then go back and do the other narrator or narrators, depending on how many there are. This book was a little more complicated because Christian's and Nina's storylines really mirror each other so much. So it was a little more difficult, but I did it as far as I could. I started with Christian. His was kind of the voice that was speaking more loudly to me when I first started the book. And so I started with his story, and I wrote probably a solid half of the book, and just, kind of set the scene and, started building up that mystery. And then I went back and started to write, some of the Nina chapters to kind of intersperse between those Christian chapters. So I love doing it that way, because I feel like I can get inside that character's head. I can make their voice that much more authentic, so that at the end of the book, They don't all sound like some version of me, but hopefully they sound unique. And then also it helps with just kind of plot. I can really be immersed in what's happening with Christian and Lily while I'm writing that, and not so much thinking about what Nina's doing and all that, and then that kind of comes later. And then through edits, I can make sure that everything is happening when I need it to be happening, and that these two storylines are really in sync.
Okay. Wow. That's impressive. I'm joined here with Mary Kubica, best-selling author. So when you talked about how you start with one narrator point of view first, and I think that's the brilliance of your books, is that you get to see inside, which is something that TV really doesn't do or movies don't do. It's not just the who done it, but it's the why done it. Right. And that only comes across when you can kind of get inside the character's head. And because you're telling essentially the same story, but from different points of view, it really ratchets up the tension. And I keep thinking, like, how is this going to collide? Right. So when you talk about writing, do you plot out? I mean, because we know, those of us who are readers know that writers are in two camps, essentially, right? You have your plotters who are step by step, this is what's going to happen. And then you have your pantsers who kind of fly by the seat of the pants and start writing. So which do you kind of fall into?
I am a pantser, 100%.
Really?
And there is like a lot of anxiety that comes with being a pantser. I start creating these stories and building this mystery. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I don't know how that's going to resolve. And what if all these pieces don't come together, in any smart, unique way? And so there's a lot of worry that that's going to happen. But, and I'm constantly telling myself, if I would just plot it out, I wouldn't feel this way. But I think the thing that just like overrides that is that sense of excitement when I do think of a twist, or I do start to imagine ways that these different storylines can come together. That's my favorite part of the writing process. And I think I would never want to plot and take anything away from that. And so much of creating a twist for me is getting to know my characters and getting to know their backstory and kind of what brought them to this point, in the book. What about their past, or, their other interactions has brought them to this point. So I feel like I have to write and I have to get to know those characters and start to build a mystery before I can solve it. So with this book, again, no spoilers, I'm going to be very vague here, but I was going
I'm trying to do the same thing.
As I was writing, I actually had a different idea in mind. I thought, as I was going, I came up with some other ideas and I thought I was going to take it in that direction. And with this book, I've never been past a deadline. I'm like this author that always turns in my manuscripts months early. Well, I wrote Just the Nicest Couple during COVID, and it was very hard with family at home, and just the ideas were not coming, and I had a lot of false starts. I started so many other manuscripts that I either lost interest in or just they didn't have legs, and I had to set them aside. And I actually came up with the idea for Just the Nicest Couple 6 weeks after the deadline. So thankfully my editor was very understanding, but I wrote so fast. Once I finally, got the idea and the story, I knew that I could see this through, and I was so super excited about it. I started writing so fast, and I was kind of like, I don't know, much more than halfway done, 3/4 of the way done, something like that. And I remember emailing my editor and saying, I just need a couple more weeks. It's almost there, and I'll send it to you. And for the essence of time, she asked if I send her, what I had, and she'd start working on that while I finished it. So I said, okay, I think I sent her a third. She finished it. She asked for more. I sent her another third. And at that point, I had actually come up with a different idea. There was something that I had sort of accidentally created in the storyline that I liked that much more for the ending. So I told my editor at that point, okay, hang on. I think I'm going to need to kind of rewrite this last third because I want to take it in a different direction. So she and I actually had gotten on a Zoom then because, again, time was of the essence. So we could sort of talk through and I could tell her my ideas. And that was actually really fun because I had my editor, my agent, and my editor's assistant on the phone. They had all read, like 2/3 of the book. And I told them where I wanted to go with the ending. So I was able to see, their visible reaction. And so that was kind of cool. I felt like, okay, I'm on the right track.
That's awesome. So the stuff that you started to write, what you refer to as your false starts, and you set them aside, do you think you'll come back to them? it just wasn't the right time to develop that? Or do you just like scrap it all together?
Yeah, so I think I will. And actually, I save everything, and
Okay.
even if it ends up being just a paragraph, here or there that I
Yeah.
purge from a manuscript, it's so valuable, like sometimes I'll be writing a different book, and I'll come to a point and think, oh, this thing that I wrote and
Yeah.
filed away a year ago will be perfect for this. But I've actually just recently finished my next book, which will be out next year. And there's quite a bit of it, at least, one of the characters and a few of the
Okay.
scenes were things that I did take from one of those false starts. So
Awesome.
it was sort of pages that I loved, but I didn't love, the overall story. And I didn't
Okay.
think that I really could finish it in any good
Yeah.
way. So it was really nice to be able to pull the things that I loved from it and put them into another manuscript.
Oh, that's awesome. We're so glad that more is coming from you. So I'm joined in conversation with Mary Kubica. This is her latest, Just the Nicest Couple. So definitely recommend it. And then all of her backlist. Absolutely. Hands down. So let's talk a little bit because we're talking about points of view. So you wrote from Christian's point of view, right? He identifies as a male. What was it like to write from that perspective to make sure you had like the verbiage right, the language, even the, I want to say swagger, but
Yeah.
just the description, right? Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that swagger. That's a good word.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will ask, who did I relate to more, Christian or Nina, of these two narrators? And I always say Christian. Christian to me was by far the easier to write. And I think I just, have more in common with him. He's this man that, when he thinks his wife and unborn child are in trouble, he will do anything to protect them, and I think like having that mother instinct in me, I could really relate to that. Whereas Nina is just a little more edgy, a little more desperate. She's a little different. And so it was a little bit harder for me to get her voice and really connect with her. That took longer than it did with Christian. So I feel like, and I've written from male perspectives before, and I've written from
Right.
teenager perspectives and,
Yes.
all sorts of different perspectives. And they're sort of, regardless of who the character is, there's like a getting to know you period always, and I always think that, when I start a book, it's like, this is somebody I just don't know them, and it's like a stranger, that I'm having a conversation with. The small talk is kind of awkward. We don't know what to say. And, that's
Right.
how I feel whenever I start a book. But I almost always write from first person perspective, because I
Yes.
feel like it allows me to just sort of like sink into their lives, become sort of one with them. And I feel like that really helps me to get to know them that much more. Like I'm not an outsider just looking through the window at what's happening. I'm really part of this story. And so I start to write, and those first couple chapters are maybe unnatural. But then as I, start to get to know the character a little bit more and start to create their voice and things like that, then I know them. And there just comes a point, which is another one of my favorite parts in the process of like, I know this person, they're a really good friend now. And, we're meeting for dinner and the conversation flows. And then I know, the writing, they talk a lot about, like characters writing themselves and things like that. But I think that when you get that familiarity with a character, that's sort of when they take over and you just know what they would do or say in a situation.
That's awesome. Almost like a shape sifter, so to speak, right? Because and it speaks to the fact that you start with the stronger narrative that it's in your voice, and you write from that perspective. So you're not kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, multitasking, right? Which we don't really do. We just flip our brains from one thing to the next. So you're not flipping from Nina to Christian. You can truly embody who Christian is.
Yes, exactly. Like I can just totally immerse myself in him.
So how do you get to know your characters? Because I know Hannah, right? Both of us know. She actually gives her characters a quiz. Like there's certain questions that she asks them, so she would get to know them a little bit better. How do you approach that?
So for me, it's just a process of writing. I know, I've been fortunate enough to talk to Hannah and so many other authors, and it's always so fascinating to me to hear everybody's, like routine. Like Hannah does the quiz, and other people will, find a picture that looks like their character, and so they have that visual. Or others have like an actual notebook devoted to each character, and they'll, sort of think them through in advance. But for me, it's just a process of writing. I go into it, I maybe know in my head, okay, this Nina's a teacher. She teaches high school, so that's kind of all I know. She's got a husband. That's about it, and her mother who she's taking care of. And that's about it. And so I go in and I just start to think, okay, you just had this argument with your husband. He didn't come home from work. How do you feel? And that's sort of where I begin. And so I start to just, assume myself that I am, just kind of this like nervous wife. And I don't know full of angst. I don't know where he is. And I just go from there. And sort of as I'm writing, then I'll create a little backstory and I'll, describe her husband a little bit and sort of start to create that kind of animosity in their marriage. And so little by little, that character just starts to take shape for me. So it's really just a process of writing and getting to know them.
Yeah. Does any of that writing show up in the book, or is there kind of like that pre-writing and then you kind of get their voice?
It really all shows up in the book. I mean, I just like dive right into it. Yeah. And I mean, which is not to say that there are not a lot of edits on the back ends. There is. But yeah, for me, it just seems to work best to just get into it. Now, there are definitely times like when it comes more to the revision process that I do have to sit down and think, okay, I need to move all these chapters around. So I'm going to have to like make a visual for this, sometimes I need to do something like that. But I think it was my book, Local and Missing. I found my notes one day on my phone and it was literally like 4 bullet points from the whole writing revision process. And it just kind of had to do with a timeline type thing. Okay. So I think that was probably the least notes jotting of things down that I've ever done. Wow. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, I love kind of the spontaneity of it, just kind of diving in and seeing where the story leads me.
That's impressive. And I think it probably speaks to, like, I'm going to just hold up your book again so everybody sees it, just The Nicest Couple, any of your books, that the pacing is there, that you like compulsively turn the page. Like it is that good. It is like I'm having cereal for dinner again because it is that good and I can't stop reading. Right. So the fact that you're kind of writing as we're reading, even though 2 separate timelines, but it has that sense of excitement that I have to know what's happening next. And just, you leave us on that cliffhanger and then it switches perspective. And I was like, well, I can't stop now. Right? So I have to see what Nina's going to say. And then Nina ends on a suspension. And then Christian starts talking. And next thing you know, it's like 2 a.m. and I'm like, okay, then. So
yeah, I love that. Well, and I think that, I like the multiple perspectives because again, like it gives this wide view to the reader. But I think that, like we're always going to be drawn to one of the narrators over another. I think that readers are just someone that they might connect with or a storyline that might be grabbing them a little bit more. And I know as a writer, I'm guilty of that too. I definitely have my favorites at the end of a story. But so I think that too, it helps with the pacing because, you might be eager to like read one of the chapters to get back to the narrator that you enjoy the most.
Yes. Well, I know at least when I first read you, which was your first book, The Good Girl, I had to like reread to make sure that I read that correctly. And I was like, no way. I mean, it was like flat out stunning. And I think like that's the great thing is that there's certain like people that you think like, oh, I really like this character. Like, and your characters are never flat, they're not all good. They're not all bad, right? They're just like us, right? A combination of both. I would say most of us are more good than bad, but painting with a broad brush. That being said, when you have this multiple point of view, like the person I think I'm like rooting for changes. Yeah. Because then you throw something else into the story. It's like, oh, I thought I got it. I thought I liked that person. And then, it changes.
Yeah. So. Yeah, definitely. And like you say, none of us is, entirely good or entirely bad, and we're just all products of what we've been through. And so I think that as, that kind of the more that I do a deep dive into these characters and find out some things about their past. And, they always surprise me, like I said, because I don't think them through too much in advance. I don't know necessarily who they're going to turn out to be.
Yeah. I think this is the only safe place where you can say that you hear voices in your head, right? And it's okay. And it's encouraged.
It's encouraged.
Right? It's encouraged. So one of the themes or the questions that comes up in this book time and time again is how well do we really know somebody? we think we know our family, we think we know our partners, we think we know our colleagues, and then
Yeah.
Is that one of the things that you wanted to come through?
Yeah, and I think that that's a theme in many of my books,
Yes.
because I think it's true. I think that we can only know as much about another person as they're willing to share with us. And, that could be someone we just vaguely know, or it could be, a spouse or a child or a best friend. And I mean, I think just like on the most basic level, how many times, someone has asked me, how's your day? And, I say good, even though I'm having the most terrible day. We're just not always, not today, it's a good day.
Oh, okay.
But I get to talk with you. Of course, it's a good day.
Oh, I was thinking the same about you, but okay.
But just, we maybe we're not willing to like reveal all the things about ourselves. So, that's just one of those things that I like to explore, and I just think that, again, just like how people are not wholly good or wholly bad, I think it's just, part of human nature. And so I love to explore that.
Thank you. And I think the other thing that you do really well is when you provide some of the backstory, right? Because it also kind of informs sometimes things that have happened in our past. And some of us are able to move forward with that. And other people, not so much, or it heavily impacts, how they go about doing and making decisions on things.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I completely agree.
One of the things that I was struck by in your book is looking at, you have a nice like statistics in terms of, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's lunchtime, about people who kill one another and how often, we think men kill women, and it's really almost like 50-50 that, women are killing men. And there's no spoilers. It's just an interesting statistic to look at. And probably, I think it said US women kill their husbands more than almost any other country in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was, that was eye-opening to me too, when I came across that statistic in my research. And, I think that is one of the things that I love about this book is, kind of like the missing husband. It sort of flips those stereotypes on their heads, and the husband can go missing too. And right. Women, again, not a spoiler, but women can hurt their spouses, whatever, or other men or whatever, so it was just, right. It was kind of turned some of those gender stereotypes around.
Yeah, I almost shudder to think about what your browsing history looks like when you're writing a book. Like DuckDuckGo, there's no like.
It just makes me laugh some days. Just all the open tabs and
yeah.
Hopefully, no one's tracking that.
Yeah, no. So I'm joined today by Mary Kubica, best-selling writer. Can you talk a little bit about your research, how you go about, creating some of these things, and so that they ring authentically and genuinely?
Yeah, this book is actually, I like, of course, writing this genre, I have the advantage of getting to make a lot of things up. Every now and then I toy around with historical fiction, but the research just intimidates me so much. But so with this book, there were things that I definitely researched. Jake, the missing husband, is a neurosurgeon, and it's not a huge part of the story, but there are definitely some passages where Nina talks about his work and kind of thinks back on conversations that they've had and things like that. Or she comes up, she goes to speak to some of his coworkers after he goes missing. And so some of his work does come into it. And, so that was something that I definitely had to research. There is some police work in here, not a lot. It's one of those things that I tend to shy away from. I like to write the story more from like the everyday citizen perspective and not more like a police procedural type story. But of course, here she goes to the police station. She reports her husband missing. And there's also an instance of a break-in in her home and some things where she does have to reach out to the police for help. And so I had to do, some research there just to figure out, well, what is protocol? Like what's going to happen? Right. So I did that. But for the most part, this is one of those stories that it's more fiction, that I was more just able to sort of immerse myself in the characters' lives and sort of just go through, the emotions that they were feeling and the things that were happening to them during that period of time.
I think that's think that's one of the things why your books resonate and why, there's like 30 different languages, over 3 million copies sold, is that resonates because they seem like the everyday person, right? This isn't something that's so unattainable. I mean, they're teachers, they're married to a doctor, the other one's married to, a market specialist, research specialist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like you think like, oh gosh, if that were to happen to me, what would it be like? And I think you do a wonderful job of kind of putting us in that, like, I hope it never happens kind of situation. But if it does, this is kind of what could play out.
Right. And thank you for that. That's always one of my goals, I wouldn't wish these things on any of your readers, but that's always one of my goals, for you to feel like this is possible, like on my worst day, this could happen to me, because I think that it creates a different kind of fear, and it makes the story that much more close to home if you feel like it's possible.
Yeah, no, it kind of hits you kind of right here. And then, you kind of find myself a little bit more hyper vigilant. Like I read one of your books or Sherry LaPena's and I'm like, same thing. I'm like, okay, I got to watch everything. I got to check the tailpipe in my car because it's snowing. Like, these are all the things that, you kind of bring out because it feels very like it could happen, and may it never happen to anybody watching or listening. Right. So, but as Hank says, it's always safe inside of a book, right?
That is right. Oh, I love Hank.
Yeah, exactly. So the other thing, probably because like a bit of a nerd, but Christian describing his job, he's a market research analyst. So it's about data, kind of like data, right? And the mix of like quantitative versus qualitative data. So like the quantitative, the numbers and things, and then the qualitative is kind of that, I don't know, descriptive, judgmenty kind of thing. So I kind of watched that kind of play out throughout your story too, that you had the blending of quantitative and qualitative. Was that deliberate?
It wasn't deliberate. And I have to say that that's one of the like fun things about being a pantser is, things happen and like connections are made that I don't mean to put in there. And sometimes I don't even realize that I've done so, until like a final read through. And so that's just one of the things that I kind of love about writing as a pantser.
Absolutely. Because you're kind of like, well, I did do that. That's pretty awesome. Look at me. So, yeah. So we were talking a little bit before, but just the juxtaposition that exists. You are one of the kindest, you're thoughtful, you're sweet. And then the stuff joined by Mary Kubica, right? The stuff that you write on the pages is somewhat dark, somewhat twisted, maniacal. So how does that exist within one person?
I think that, and we were talking a little bit before the show about, how I feel like every suspense writer, thriller writer that I have met is incredibly kind. And the community, I remember when I was first getting, I think I had just sold my first book and my editor encouraged me to get on social media because I did not have a social media presence at all. And she told me, to start connecting with other authors. And I was honestly afraid. I thought, these authors don't want to talk to me. And I just found this incredible community of writers, and they were just so giving with advice, with encouragement, with, helping share news of my coming book. And it was just amazing. And I've been able to, go to writing conferences and be on panels with other authors and things like that. But I feel like the suspense thriller world is just the most genuine, kind people out there. And here's my hypothesis is that because the books that we write are so dark, it's very like, it's a release. We get to put, all that angst that we're feeling out on the page so that we can be like happy in real life. And whereas other genres, that are having to create these happy endings all the time and just all this, just happy stuff on the page, they're not able to get that same, sense of release that we are. That's my hypothesis. So
I think it could play out as true, and no longer a hypothesis, but it could be, it could become a proof. And I've gone to BoucherCon twice, and I have to say that the first one I went to was when I met you, but it's like this reunion, like other writers genuinely happy for one another. There's no sense of competing when you're on panels like, oh gosh, I hope like I do a good job so they buy my books and not the writer sitting to my left or to my right, because they figure if you're all nice, then you're going to eventually read
Right.
each other's, right? As a reader, like,
Yeah.
oh, Mary said this was good, so now I have to read Hannah's. Hannah said this was good, so now I have to read,
Right.
Hank's, and so on.
And there's no real competition when you
Mm-mm.
really think about it. It's not like someone's just going to go buy one book. I mean, you might go buy one book at a book festival,
Yeah,
but in
who
your
buys
life,
one book? Those are not my people.
right?
Right.
So it's like you're not competing. Someone's
Mm-mm.
not going to buy Hannah's book versus mine. They
Right.
might whatever. So there's really, the way I see it, there's no harm in helping support each other. And it's just one of those careers that is, I love what I do, but it's me and my characters and
Yeah.
my laptop, and we don't have an office to go to and coworkers to talk to on a daily basis. And so to make those connections with other authors and be able to support each other, or to say, well, I got this lousy review and I feel terrible about it, like another author really gets that because they've been in the
Right.
same position. So it's just been wonderful to be able to make all these connections. And like I said, whether it's like a book festival or a conference or something like that,
Yeah.
or just, there are so many, DMs and text messages, and every now and then, group of authors will jump on a Zoom so that we can just kind of talk through, what's going
That's
on in our
awesome.
writing careers. And it's just amazing to have that connection.
Absolutely. Becky says it's always the sweet, quiet ones with the best stories. So yeah, and I have to think it's probably a bit of a, lonely or isolating pursuit. Like you said,
Yeah.
it's you and your characters.
Yeah.
Right. So wherever you go, your characters go, right?
Oh yeah, they're always with me. I can never leave them behind.
Are
um,
they always with you, like from the first book that you wrote?
they are.
Or
I
do
mean,
they kind of shift kind of to the background when the new one comes forward and
the ones that I'm writing right now are always the most present, but there are definitely characters from the beginning. Not all of them, but there are a number of characters from the beginning that just stay with me. But when I'm right in the middle of writing, it's one of those jobs, you can never pack up and be done with it at the end of the day. I'm
yeah,
always thinking about it. Sometimes I'm dreaming about my characters, and
yeah,
so it's a good and a bad thing. But
yeah,
yeah, it's definitely, I feel like it's, this is my dream to be able to do it. But like any career, it's
yeah,
it's a job. And, there are days that it's full of a lot of angst. And, I don't
yeah.
know if I'm going to ever think of a twist, or you get that bad review or things like that. But it's my dream too.
Yeah, hell of a storyteller. Just no matter what, like have that like somewhere pinned so that you always look up at that, right?
That's right.
So I'm joined by Mary Kubica, best-selling writer. Your background is in history,
Yeah.
right? As a history teacher, do you ever, I know you kind of touched on it ever so briefly a little bit ago. Have you ever thought about doing historical fiction?
So I think about it a lot, and I love to read historical fiction. Other than suspense, it's definitely my favorite genre to read. But the research really intimidates me. And I think one of my favorite things about writing is just being able to fully immerse myself in my characters. And
Okay.
one of my books, I can't remember which one, I was going to set just like 1980s, just a little bit in
Ooh,
the past.
yeah.
And as I started to write it, I found that I was struggling. Like I just had to stop so much during the writing to think like, what cars were people driving? And, just like everything I
Exactly.
kind of, what was, what were we wearing, and what were all the hairstyles and stuff like
Oh, I
that.
can
And
tell you everything I wore in
I
the
know,
80s. The big hair and the big bangs and the acid washed. Oh yeah.
there was something about it that I
Yeah.
felt like I just kept getting pulled out of the
Yeah.
story. And so, I kind of like stopped that and just
Yeah.
moved the story to the present. But so the idea is always still there. I think I would need to do it when maybe after my kids are in college, and I have a little bit more time that I can just really devote to it. And then I think I talk, to a number of historical fiction writers, and I think I would need to probably do like the bulk of the research first so that I could still kind of have that immersive experience when I'm writing the book.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that's uncanny is when you write historical fiction, and I've read it, right? Just
Yeah.
the amount of detail on things. Like I can remember reading like Jess Montgomery, and hers are set, almost 100 years ago, like first sheriff in Ohio, and talking about how like Campbell's soup came to the place where they would go and get groceries. It wasn't like a grocery store yet, but like how that changed everything. And I was like, stuff that we are so used to seeing,
Right.
and that was like just known. And she talks about like researching and wanting to make sure she gets the beater right, that they're making the eggs, and
Yeah.
And then finally, I think her husband was like, you know what, just say the eggs were beaten. Like, you don't have to
Right.
describe it, like just wanting to make sure everything is accurate, because not me, but some readers tend to like look for all those little things that just aren't quite right, instead of
Right. Just
enjoying the overall arc of the story, right?
Yes, I completely agree. And yeah, I mean, readers know their stuff, and they will let you know if you have made a mistake. And every historical fiction book that I've ever read, though, I feel like just I am completely transported. And
Absolutely.
it is a magical experience. And so that, just being such a fan of the genre, I do worry that I don't know, maybe I should stay in my own lane.
Yeah, well, I think there's room for you to, write in more than one lane, for sure. For sure. So I'm talking to Mary Kubica, best-selling author. What have I not asked that you want readers to know?
You have done such a great job asking questions. I don't know that I can think of any others. I feel like I don't know, like I said, I feel really fortunate that I get to live out my dream, and connecting with readers has just been such an amazing experience for me. And social media and events like this that we can do virtually just make that experience all the more possible. I
Yeah,
feel like virtual events are one of the few good things to come out of COVID, that we can
I
connect with
agree.
so many readers.
Yeah,
But because I write the books, and like I said before, it's just me and my characters.
yeah,
There's such an amazing feeling to be able to like put those books out there and have readers read them, and connect with me and tell me they enjoyed them, or they were really surprised by an ending, or they liked
yeah,
a character, or they hated a character, or whatever.
yeah.
But just to be able to share that like very personal experience with other people and get that feedback, and it kind of makes the thing, makes it all go for full circle. And so I love opportunities like this.
Oh, well, thank you. How long does it take you roughly to write a book?
Yeah. So for the most part, I would say like that first messy draft, probably about 7 to 8 months, depending on how cooperative the book is being. Just the nicest couple. When I finally actually settled on the idea, it was probably like 3 months, which is I think one of my fastest. But it was like a year and a half of things not going right before they
Okay.
finally did. But for the most part, every other book I would say is about 7 to 8 months for that first draft. And then I kind of edit, as much as I can as I go. But then, there's definitely like a couple read throughs at the end, making sure everything is where it needs to be. And
Right.
then I'll send. I never let anybody read it when it's like in the process. But then when I'm done with that first draft, I'll send it to my editor and my agent. They're basically the only people that get a first look at it. Sometimes my husband, but lately he's wanted it more like on the second draft. Just to like, because once you read it and you know where it's going, you can't forget that. So I think he just,
Right.
and I don't blame him. He likes it when it's a little bit more finished. So then, I'll get notes back from my editor, and it's always such a good process. Cause I think, as a writer, you don't know, you're so connected to the story and the character, and you spend so much time with it that you don't know, is the twist going to catch people by surprise, or were maybe some of the clues too like heavy-handed and they're giving something away, or are there characters that are just like so unlikable that they're ruining the reading experience? And just to kind of get that feedback from my editor, I feel like then, I can kind of take the book to the next level. It's always so good too, because when she has the book, she has it for maybe a month, 3 weeks to a month, I would say. But that's time that I am really like, I'm not working on the book. I'm trying my hardest not to think about it. I'm usually like, whatever, I'm trying to do all the things that I didn't do when I was trying to finish the manuscript. So when she does send it back with her notes, I can go back to it with fresh eyes. And it's always just such a different experience. I have new ideas and just new energy to bring to the manuscript at that point. So then, I'll go through, I'll make changes. And then we usually go through like 1 or 2 more rounds of just like the really, nitty gritty at that point.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at how much time that you spend writing, right? Because I think that's fantastic. But like for us as readers, does that make you feel bad that it doesn't take us like 7 to 8 months to read it?
No,
But it takes us like, we kind of binge right through it.
Right. Well, it doesn't make me feel bad. That it makes me feel good, because of course that's the hope, of course. of course, there won't be another book for a year plus, but,
Sure.
but it's, that's my dream as a writer, is that a reader just binge reads it and loves it. And it's the kind of
Okay.
book that they can't put down. So,
Okay.
I
Check.
do always,
Check.
right? Yeah.
Well
So I
done.
do always laugh though, I think it was like days after Just the Nicest Couple, came out, and people are saying, finished it. When's the next one?
Well, yeah, it's almost like Thanksgiving dinner, right? Like you spend all this time prepping and like within within like an hour, that's being generous. It's done, gone.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it's so true, right? And
Yeah,
then it's time to do the dishes.
that's exactly right. So, how do you keep it all straight, right? You have a book coming out next year,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
2024.
Yes.
You're promoting Just the Nicest Couple, and then you're probably working on something right now. So,
Yeah.
like, how do you keep that
Yeah.
sane, I guess?
Yeah. So it's a lot. So you're right. Yeah, promoting Just the Nicest Couple, which will be out in paperback towards the holidays. And then the new book will be out early April. And then so I'm just finishing up like final revisions on that one. So I am
Okay.
still with that one right now. But yeah, I mean, like I'm hoping to get it back to my editor within the next couple weeks. And then you're right that I'll just be jumping into the next book. So it's always interesting because like the next book, I won't have touched it for probably 10 or 11 months by the time it comes out. So sometimes I forget things, and so I have
Yeah.
to go back and I have to read it
Yeah.
again, or, which is always hard to reread a manuscript when you cannot actually make changes to it because it's done. But just, a lot of times I'll do events like this, or I'll do book clubs, which are
Okay.
even more difficult if I've forgotten things because we go into the details of the book. So
Yeah.
they do
Spoilers are involved in book clubs. So,
exactly. So
okay.
they'll, sometimes they'll ask these questions, and I think I don't even remember writing that.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, so it's I mean, theoretically, in a perfect world, by the time the next book comes out in April, I will be almost done or done with other manuscripts.
Wow. That's amazing. So I'm talking to best-selling writer Mary Kubica, Just the Nicest Couple. One question I just want to ask real quick. How much influence do you have on the cover? Because your covers are always stunning.
Yeah, so it's so that's another thing that's so interesting. I feel like in talking to different authors at different publishers because it's all different. But so typically my publisher will send me like one cover, and
Mhm.
so that Just the Nicest Couple is my 8th book, and I would say probably 6 of them I just loved from the
Mhm.
beginning. I was just thrilled, loved the cover, it was good to go.
Okay.
And then there were a couple that I didn't love. And actually, Just the Nicest Couple is one of the ones that the first cover that they sent me, I didn't love.
Okay.
And it was a house, but there was just nothing that grabbed me. It was like a
Yeah.
house. There was nothing off about it. It was
It was
daytime, so
gonna
it
hold it
didn't
up like
even,
that. Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't like spooky at all. It didn't grab me, and
Right.
it was perfectly fine, but it was just that, and so I pushed back on that one. And so I had kind of some ideas, about it a little bit,
Mhm.
and they were great to work with me. The art director kind of tried to revise what he
Okay.
had, and ultimately, I think everybody agreed that it was only getting worse. So
Okay.
at that point, we scrapped it, and there had been a few other like draft concepts that my publisher had seen that I had not seen. So at that point, they did share with me. I think there were like 5 or 6 other
Okay.
concepts, and this final cover here was one of them. And the minute I laid eyes on it,
You
I
knew.
loved it. Yeah, I just knew. I just thought, I mean, it was kind of so dreamy, but so spooky at the same
Yeah.
time. Something ominous is going on here. And I loved the colors.
Yes.
It really grabbed me. And, from the readers that I've spoken to, it seems like everybody kind of agrees.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like wallpapered in my, no, I'm kidding. It's not wallpapered in my house. So you're joining here so graciously as part of Cleveland Reads, right? Which is about literacy. So will you talk a little bit about why literacy is important to you?
It's so important. I mean, reading it opens up so many worlds, and so many opportunities for people. And I just, I was one of those kids that grew up reading from a young age. I loved being read to in school, and my mother would read to me. And I just feel like books have always been a huge part of my life. When I was younger, I would go to the library anytime I could. I would bring home as many books as I could. And just whatever interested me. I remember when I was younger, just, being interested in animals or insects or whatever. And I would just go get all the books I could and bring them home and read them. So it's just, being able to read is just this gateway to all these different worlds that we don't always have access to, in our real everyday lives. And I'm so grateful for that. And I think it's one of those things that, I wish everybody could have. And so I love all that you are doing to increase literacy throughout Cleveland. And I just think it's so important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go to the final 5 questions. Okay. What's the best part about being a writer?
The readers, honestly, I don't know, I love what I do. I feel I'm a morning writer, and it's like, I literally go to bed and I'm excited by the idea that I get to wake up in the morning and write. But it's really when I get to share that with readers and make those connections and get that feedback that I love the most.
Aw, awesome. What writer do you fangirl over?
So many.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way.
Before we went live here, Jen and I were talking about Ruth Ware, and she's at the top of the list. Ruth Ware, I mean, she's an incredible writer, but she's such a warm, wonderful human being too. And I love that, for her books to be doing as well as they are, and for her to have all this massive success, but then to still be so down to earth and supportive of her fellow writers. I love that.
Awesome. What book, besides any of yours, all 8 of them, 8, do you think everybody should read, and why?
Yeah. So my favorite book is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and it's the Vietnam War. A lot of people probably have read it. That's one of the few books that I find myself reading every couple of years. I'm not usually a repeat reader. Once I know where a book is going, I don't need to read it again, but that's one that there's just that's one just that really, really speaks to me. And it was actually the book that really got me into wanting to study history and become a history teacher.
Oh, that's awesome. What era of history did you teach?
I taught mostly U.S. history, but I did teach world history. This was actually one of my favorites. It was an elective course. So you knew that the kids that were there were the ones that really wanted to be
choice.
there. Yeah. It was ancient and medieval history, which was just really cool to get to dive into with a smaller group of kids.
Awesome.
Yeah. So a little bit of it all.
Yeah. What was your the first rock concert that you ever went to?
That's a really good question. My guess is Dave Matthews Bands, but I feel like I would think I was in college by the time, when I went to maybe high school when I went to my first bands, but I want to say it was Dave Matthews or Counting Crows. There would be one of them.
Dare I tell you that where I went to undergrad was around Richmond. So Dave Matthews, I went to a school that had 1,100 students, so very small school, would play at fraternity parties. I know, right?
Amazing. That is
we would play we would do these Earth Day concerts with 4 or 5 local bands, and he would play and now to see him.
Right. Yeah.
It's amazing.
You knew him when.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. I wish he doesn't know me, but anymore. So as a history teacher, what time period would you like to go back to and live for a little bit?
That's such a good question. I am as many people are, I think that I'm kind of fascinated with the 60s in particular, just kind of everything that was going on from a social and political standpoint. I think that I'd love to have lived during that time and get to experience it firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to say a huge thank you. This is Mary Kubica, best-selling author, for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to our tech team, Mike, for making sure everything goes smoothly. Thank you to Erica for making this possible. And then thanks to all of you who are watching and listening to Writers Unplugged for sharing your love of reading with each other. I'm Jen Jumba from the Cleveland Public Library. Happy reading.
Thanks.